Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the news of a new poll that shows that if there were to be a general election tomorrow, the Conservatives would lose their majority and Labour and the SNP would be able to hold the balance of power in the UK. Now, I'm not going to discuss this from a point of view of inevitable Tory defeat in 2024, far from it, but I want to focus on the lessons that this and other polls reveal for the various political parties, most especially really Conservatives and Labour, if they want to gain in the next general election. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, a poll has been conducted using the multi-level regression and post-stratification method that YouGov, for example, have been using very accurately to predict election results for a few years now. It's a method that has proven itself time and again to be very, very and so we can certainly regard it as useful. It does not work out the proportion of the population and then turn that into seats. It's much more sophisticated. It predicts that with current voting habits or intentions, were there to be a general election now, it would mean that the Conservatives would lose their majority. They'd still have the most seats, but only, crucially, 2 more than Labour. The Liberal Democrats would also lose seats and actually be virtually wiped out, but the SNP would make even further gains if that were possible and would virtually have the whole of Scotland. But crucially in Westminster would be in a position to be kingmakers. Now, I'm not saying that they'd be able to decide whether the government was Labour or the Conservatives. Zero way they'd support the Conservatives, of course. But there would be 2 possible outcomes for the government in this scenario. Now, 1. Labour and the SNP could come to terms over a coalition. Inevitably, part of the price for the SNP would be something along the lines of Scottish independence referendum. Now, I would suggest the best thing would be legislation making it clear that the Scottish Parliament had the right to issue independence referenda, with Westminster having no say in the matter. That would be a major prize for the SNP because I'm going to come on to this, but arguably it wouldn't make sense for them to insist on just an independence referendum because they could lose it. And I know some people may scoff at that, but I will come to that. Because if the SNP did lose that referendum, then, well, they've shot their load. They haven't then got anything. But if they got legislation that allows them to make clear that it's for the Scottish Parliament to decide this matter, you know, Scotland is sovereign in this regard, then of course they win that power for the Scottish Parliament for the future, even if they lose the next referendum. Now, my personal hope would be that they would support Labour's attempts to increase devolution before enacting that legislation in return for a public commitment within the lifespan of the Parliament. And I'd also hope that the SNP will insist upon supporting a referendum for proportional representation in Westminster elections. My fear would be that they would not pursue this, as they'd be getting what they really want with Scottish control over independence issues. But we will see. The second possibility is that the SNP aren't able to strike a deal with Labour because they insist on something Labour can't give. Maybe they insist on an independence referendum immediately, like in the first year, which Labour couldn't grant. I can see Labour saying, look, let us implement a load of devolution first, and as part of this package, we will also make sure that that legislation includes the right of the Scottish Parliament to be able to issue binding independence referenda. And that way, Labour get their last chance to save the Union with their devolution plans, and if it's not up to what people in Scotland would want, then the referendum will be inevitable, and if Labour do fail on that, well, then they'll lose. Now, if, however, like I said, the SNP do insist on, well, we want an independence referendum right now, Labour couldn't grant that. So what would happen in reality is the SNP they'd support Labour in confidence motions, because you could look at it, you could say, well, the Conservatives would have had the most seats. Do they get the right to form a minority government themselves? I'm sure it's not in the SNP's interest to do that. They will support Labour as the government, but a minority government, and Labour would have to horse trade for every piece of business they wanted to get through. So that wouldn't suit either the SNP or Labour. So I think there would be a real impetus for both sides to come to agreement on a coalition. But that's what would happen if the 2024 general election were tomorrow. In reality, this is not a prediction for 2024 for a number of reasons. Two main ones. One, we're not campaigning. Significant numbers of voters do have their minds changed by campaigns. And if it were not the case, parties would not save up so much money for these campaigns to blow their load in the few weeks before a general election. And we know that the Conservatives will run an effective campaign to boost their support. It will be dishonest, it'll be outrageous, but it will be effective. As a result, Labour realistically need much more support built up before that campaign. We also have to accept, a little aside here, that the Conservatives intend to change some boundaries to stack the odds further in their favour. Secondly, the poll was conducted just before the Brexit deal was announced, at a time of acute Tory cock-up. COVID was running riot, well it still is now, but trade was also badly affected. Now, if the same poll were to be carried out now, it would be argued that the Conservatives would get a boost from the Brexit deal. And I would agree with that, completely agree with that. But although this poll doesn't serve as a prediction, it does serve as lessons. It shows that the public are not going to support an incompetent Conservative government. That is encouraging. Bear in mind that the government have not given a particularly tough time or given a particularly tough time by the media. All things considered, they've been allowed to claim that they've handled things as well as anyone could have, and actually better than the available parties in the UK. It's like they've been able to say, well, imagine if Labour had been charged, it would have been a disaster. But this poll shows that not enough people will believe that. Even with media backing the Conservatives against the evidence of their own lives being affected, do you know what? No. That's got to be a worry for the Conservatives and a boost for Labour. For Labour, it shows that they just need to keep exposing Conservative corruption and incompetence as effectively as they did in 2020, because it will continue. We haven't just had a blip, that the country will recover from over the next few years. We've got lunatics in charge. Despite what the Sunday Express was saying yesterday, 2021 will not be the year we beat COVID either. And I hope and expect that the situation will improve this year, but I see no experts plotting a path to actually beating it this year. In addition, what hope there is of at least improving our situation will be massively slowed down by the sort of Boris Johnson procrastination that I'll be talking about in a video tomorrow. The same lesson is a warning to the Conservatives. Sure, they can comfort themselves with the deal that would have made the situation look better for them if the poll were to be carried out now. But by 2024, people will want to have seen the tangible benefits of that deal, because they'll be able to compare it with how life was like in the EU. So what if the poll is carried out in, say, half a year's time, 1 year's time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time? What if we're still behind the curve on dealing with COVID, when more of the Brexit lies have been exposed? When that levelling up that the Conservatives promised of infrastructure is still a promise and not concrete action? They know that their government are going to continue to mess everything up whilst Boris Johnson is in charge. And it will serve as a sobering lesson to them that they cannot win another general election campaign with him in charge. In fact, there could come a point where the Conservatives have lost the election years before it even takes place. John Major showed this, in about years before the 1997 election that he did lose. He'd lost it by then. He'd lost the trust of the public. And that's all there was to it. Finally, I'll also add another little thought into the mix to give us a bit of hope. So although I said I expect the Conservatives to get a boost in the actual election in 2024, because I anticipate that they will run an effective campaign, there's also something that will give Labour and possibly the Liberal Democrats a boost as well. And I don't mean an equally slick campaign. I have no hopes of that at all. I hope they get better campaign strategists in, but I pin no hopes on it at all. Frankly, it should be impossible right now for the Conservatives to have lost so much ground in the polls in just 1 year since a barnstorming general election success. Both Labour and the Liberal Democrats have new leaders. Now, The people that are switching to supporting Labour especially, because it's very up and down with the Lib Dems, is down to people basically deciding that they'll take the party sight unseen over the Conservatives. It's not people going, oh yeah, I really want a Labour government, because the people who really want a Labour government were always supporters of Labour. The ones who have switched their support to Labour, they can hardly say, oh yeah, this is going to be brilliant, because you ask them, so what's a Labour government going to deliver? Oh, I don't know, they haven't said. No, they haven't said. They're basically choosing them as better the devil you don't know. They know the Conservatives are absolutely disastrous. Anything's got to be better than this. Once the campaign gets underway, people will know what Labour are going to deliver because they will firm up their policies, and those policies will go alongside, hopefully, continuing devastating takedowns of the Conservatives' 14 years in office by then. If that boost can equal or even exceed the boost that the Conservatives get from their lying their way through another campaign, that is the route to getting rid of them. We'd still potentially be talking about a coalition of parties. I cannot foresee a path that allows Labour to get a large enough majority. It's not impossible to get a numerical majority, but bear in mind there'll always be 20 to 30 MPs who will just rebel against whatever Starmer does, so he won't have a working majority. So he will need to work with other parties, realistically. But all things considered, I would take that situation, or even a coalition, especially if we can implement proportional representation, because that is my main prize at the moment, and work towards moving back to the European family again. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.